The Tsarian War Council chamber gleamed with polished obsidian and chromium fixtures that reflected the blue-tinged holographic displays hovering above the central table. Commander Xarvok stood tall, his scaled skin catching the light as he gestured toward the largest projection. A real-time feed from the stealth vessels, approaching Proxima Centauri IV. Phase 1 complete, reported a tactical officer, her voice betraying a hint of excitement that would normally be suppressed in Tsarian military proceedings. Perimeter defenses bypassed. Human detection systems remain inactive. Xarvok permitted himself a small nod of approval. The Tsarian Empire had spent decades studying human colony patterns, defense protocols, and most importantly, their psychological profiles. This operation would cement his place in Tsarian history, not through wasteful conquest, but through the far more sophisticated approach of species evaluation. Infiltration teams are proceeding to primary targets, the officer continued as the hologram shifted to show Tsarian warriors in phase adaptive armor slipping through the silent corridors of residential hab blocks. Proceeding to extraction phase. The council members leaned forward collectively as the feed switched between multiple teams. Each moved with practiced precision toward their assigned targets, the sleeping quarters of human offspring. The selection had been meticulously calculated. 38 children between the ages of 4 and 12 standard years, representing a diverse genetic sampling of the colony. Remember, Xarvok cautioned, non-lethal methods only. The success of this operation depends on retrieving them unharmed. The Supreme Strategist, oldest among the council members, raised a gnarled finger. Why do we bother with such restraint, Commander? If we simply destroyed one of their colonies, would that not be a more efficient test of their resolve? Xarvok had anticipated this question. Efficiency isn't our goal, Supreme Strategist. Understanding is. Any species will respond to mass casualties with predictable military retaliation, but hostage negotiation reveals character, adaptability, and values. If humans prove worthy, they may yet earn vassal status rather than simple conquest. The extraction unfolded with the precision Tsarian operations were known for across the galaxy. Sleeping children were quickly sedated to ensure they remained unconscious, then placed in specialized transport pods designed to maintain their unique physiological requirements. Genetic scanners confirmed each target's identity before removal. All 38 subjects secured, reported the tactical officer as the extraction teams returned to their vessels. No casualties, no alarms triggered. A ripple of appreciation moved through the council chamber. Even the Supreme Strategist inclined his head in acknowledgement of the operation's flawless execution. Now, Xarvok announced, activating a different projection showing the diplomatic communication channels. We wait for their response and... The chamber's security system chimed with an urgent alert. Commander, interrupted the communications officer, an unscheduled vessel has just emerged from hyperspace at the outer marker. It's a Veldari diplomatic cruiser, requesting immediate emergency docking. The council members exchanged glances. The Veldari Confederation rarely involved themselves in military matters, preferring to maintain their position as neutral observers and occasional mediators of galactic politics. What business could they possibly have with this operation? Demanded the Supreme Strategist. Before Xarvok could respond, the communications officer paled visibly. Sir, it's Ambassador Kaleth himself. He's invoking Ancient Protocol 7 Gamma. That's a catastrophic risk assessment intervention. Silence fell across the chamber. No living Tsarian had ever witnessed the invocation of such a protocol. Grant docking permission, Xarvok ordered, his curiosity overriding protocol. When Ambassador Kaleth entered the chamber minutes later, the Tsarians were unprepared for his appearance. The typically serene diplomat, known for his measured responses and almost glacial diplomatic pace, trembled visibly. His multifaceted eyes, evolved to interpret subtle emotional cues across thousands of species, were wide with what could only be described as naked fear. Return them, the ancient Veldari whispered, his normally melodious voice cracking. Return the children immediately. Sarvok stepped forward, intrigued rather than concerned. Ambassador, what prompts this dramatic entrance? The human response hasn't even. You don't understand, Killith interrupted, a shocking breach of diplomatic etiquette. In 4,000 cycles of diplomatic service, I have never seen a species transform so completely as humans do when their offspring are threatened. His gaze swept the chamber. You didn't capture bargaining chips. You've triggered an extinction-level event for your people. Grand Marshal Vexicor rose from his seat, towering over the diminutive Veldari ambassador. Extinction-level event. Your diplomatic immunity doesn't extend to making threats against the Tarian Empire, Ambassador. Killith's antennae flattened against his skull, a physiological response the Tarians recognized as distress. I make no threats. I bring mourning based on historical precedent. Before Vexicor could respond, Killith withdrew an ancient device from the folds of his robe. It resembled a simple crystalline cube, its translucent surface clouded with age. Without requesting permission, he placed it on the central console and activated it with a series of precise gestures. The council chamber's security systems blared as the Veldari device overrode their projectors. Sarian guards moved forward, weapons raised, but Sarvok held up a hand. Wait, let's see what has frightened one of the oldest diplomatic minds in the galaxy. The holographic displays flickered and resolved into unfamiliar star charts. The Barathi Dominion, Killith narrated as an image of an avian species appeared. Technological innovators who captured 17 human children for cognitive experimentation 2 centuries ago. The projection shifted to show a timeline of events. The humans sent no military fleet initially. The Barathi assumed negotiations would follow. Killith's voice tightened. Instead, civilian vessels, science ships, mining platforms, even recreational craft, began arriving in Barathi space. Each carried parents, family members, or simply humans who volunteered. The hologram displayed grainy footage of human vessels, primitive by current standards, sacrificing themselves in waves against Barathi defenses. The Barathi lost their first colony within 7 standard days, Killith continued. Their entire civilization collapsed within a month, not through superior tactics or technology, but through the simple fact that the humans refused to stop coming. Young council member Tazreen leaned forward, her scales shimmering with skepticism. All species protect their young. What makes humans different from us in this regard? Killith manipulated the device again. Neural scans, he explained as comparative brain images appeared. Sarian protective instincts operate through your prefrontal cortical regions, logical, measured responses that balance risk assessment with protective action. The human neural scan appeared decided, showing dramatically different activation patterns. When human offspring are threatened, their limbic and motor systems create a unique neural cascade that bypasses rational thought and self-preservation simultaneously. They become something else entirely. Sarvok studied the scans with growing concern. These patterns look similar to the legendary Krell berserkers, Killith confirmed, except the Krell required chemical stimulants and could maintain such states for minutes at most. Humans can sustain this neural state for weeks. The display shifted to new footage, sleek vessels with unfamiliar configurations. The Dreth hegemony, technologically superior to humans by every metric. They abducted children from an orbital school as leverage in territorial negotiations. The timeline displayed a shockingly brief period, 11 days, before revealing the aftermath. A star system with an artificially induced nova where the Dreth homeworld had been. The humans didn't even claim responsibility, Killith said quietly. They simply ensured there would never again be a Dreth civilization capable of threatening their young. A communications officer interrupted, her voice unsteady. Commander, we're detecting unusual activity throughout Earth's solar system and all human colonies. Civilian manufacturing facilities are converting to military production. Volunteer registries have crashed from overwhelming response volumes. And, she hesitated, every private vessel with interstellar capability is changing course, converging toward our space. Tazrine's skepticism faltered. How many vessels? Current estimates exceed 40,000, the officer replied, and rising. Kaleth's expression remained grave. You've studied humans as potential adversaries, measuring their military doctrine, technological capabilities, and diplomatic positions. But you've missed the fundamental truth about their species. He gestured toward the neural scans still displayed. This isn't a strategic response. It's not even a coordinated one. It's an instinct more fundamental than self-preservation. Zarvok felt a cold sensation spreading through his chest as he recalled ancient Sarian myths. Tales of warriors who fought beyond death, whose determination transcended physical limitations. Stories he had always dismissed as mere legend. "Commander," the tactical officer called, "we've intercepted a transmission from the human colony. They've discovered the abduction." The chamber fell silent as the message played. Not panicked cries or diplomatic outrage, but a woman's voice, eerily calm, speaking 6 words that sent a chill through every Tsarian present. "We're coming for our children. All of us." 3 days later, the Tsarian border outpost Vigilance Prime detected an anomaly approaching from human space. A single vessel, moving at sublight speed, broadcasting diplomatic credentials on all frequencies. "Tactical assessment," Karvok demanded, observing the feed from the War Council chamber. "Minimal armaments," reported the outpost commander. "Standard defensive capabilities only. Life signs indicate a single human occupant. No cloaked escorts detected." Grand Marshal Vexicor scoffed. "A lone emissary. Perhaps the humans are more reasonable than our Veldari friend suggested." Ambassador Kaleth, who had remained on the Tsarian homeworld, at Sarvok's insistence, shook his head. "This is consistent with historical patterns. They always send a single representative first." The vessel identified itself as the Harbinger, requesting permission to dock and present terms. After extensive security scans confirmed the absence of weapons or hidden technologies, Sarvok granted clearance. The human who emerged from the airlock defied Tsarian expectations. Dr. Eleanor Chen stood barely to the shoulder height of the average Tsarian, her frame slight, her movements deliberate and unhurried. She wore no military uniform, only simple attire with a small insignia identifying her as an anthropologist specializing in interspecies conflict resolution. "I expected a military negotiator," Sarvok said as she entered the council chamber. "I requested this assignment personally," Dr. Chen replied, her voice carrying a calm precision that seemed at odds with Kaleth's warnings about human emotional instability. "I believe I'm uniquely qualified to help you understand what's coming." "And what credentials grant you such qualification, Doctor?" asked Vexcor. Chen's gaze shifted to the marshal, unwavering. "My son, Elian Chen, age 7 standard years, is among the children you've taken." A murmur passed through the council. Sending a parent as negotiator contradicted all diplomatic protocols. In Tsarian culture, those with personal stakes were considered compromised, incapable of rational negotiation. "Before we begin," Chen continued, "I should inform you that I've been authorized to offer terms for the immediate return of our children." She placed a small transparent cube on the table, similar in design to Kaleth's device, but of unmistakably human manufacture. "These are your terms?" Karvok asked, studying the object. "No," Chen replied. "This contains historical context I believe you should review before we discuss terms." She activated the cube with a touch. "You have 48 hours to return our children unharmed. After that, what happens will be beyond anyone's control to stop." The cube projected images around the chamber, not of military engagements or technological demonstrations, as the Tsarians expected, but intimate moments of human protective instinct. A human parent lifting a ground transport vehicle that had collapsed onto a child. Civilians charging into burning structures, emerging with children moments before collapse. Historical footage of lightly armed human rescue teams infiltrating heavily fortified compounds. The display shifted to more recent transmissions, Thousands of vessels changing course, many of them civilian craft being retrofitted with hastily mounted weapon systems. Orbital shipyards working at triple capacity. Colony worlds emptying as volunteers flocked to assembly points. But most disturbing to the Tsarian observers was the complete absence of political debate. Human communication channels showed no opposition to the mobilization, no factions arguing for diplomatic solutions, no protests against potential war. Only a singular focus that contradicted everything Tsarian intelligence had assessed about human social dynamics. As the presentation concluded, the cube displayed a final image: human families, parents, grandparents, older siblings, lining up outside military registration centers, volunteering not just resources but themselves. "What you fail to understand," Chen said into the silence that followed, "is that this isn't a military response. This is a parental response." Tazreen, who had been watching with growing horror, turned to Killeth. "You knew this would happen. Why did you not warn us more forcefully?" "Would you have believed me?" the Veldari asked softly. "Some truths must be witnessed to be understood." Chen retrieved the cube. "I'll return tomorrow for your decision." At the chamber entrance, she paused and added, "For what it's worth, Commander Xarvok, I hope we can resolve this without demonstrating why taking our children was a mistake. But understand, that choice now rests entirely with you." After she departed, Xarvok accessed the secure intelligence archives, searching for information the Council might have overlooked. Deep in classified xenobiology records, he found what he feared. Human neural patterns during child protection scenarios showed remarkable similarity to ancient records of the Krell berserkers, warriors so fearsome that primitive Tsarians had once worshipped them as gods. "The Council of the Tsarian Empire will now deliberate," announced the Supreme Strategist, his voice echoing in the chamber as security protocols activated, sealing the room against surveillance. Grand Marshal Vexicor immediately dominated the discussion. "This is psychological warfare, nothing more. The humans know they cannot defeat our fleet through conventional means, so they attempt to intimidate us with these emotional displays. And if they aren't bluffing," Tazreen countered, her scales shifting to a troubled azure hue. "Ambassador Killeth's historical records are verified by our own archives. 2 civilizations that took human children no longer exist." Vexcor waved a dismissive hand. "Coincidence or Veldari manipulation of historical records? The Barathi suffered internal collapse from resource depletion. The Dreth Nova was a natural stellar event." "Was it?" Xarvok projected his latest findings onto the central display. "Our deep space monitoring outpost in Sector 12 captured this anomaly during the Dreth incident. The recording showed a seemingly insignificant gravitational distortion near the Dreth star just before its catastrophic transformation. Analysis suggests deliberate manipulation of the star's core fusion processes, technology we considered theoretically impossible." The chamber fell silent as the implications registered. Tsarian military doctrine centered on technological superiority and disciplined adherence to established tactical frameworks. The concept of an adversary deploying unpredictable, theoretically impossible methods challenged their fundamental understanding of warfare. Even if these threats are credible, Vexcor argued, surrendering to the first show of force establishes a dangerous precedent. The Tsarian Empire does not capitulate. Xarvok moved to a secondary console, accessing classified security channels. "During the night cycle, I dispatched inquiries to our deep cover intelligence assets in human space. 37 agents broke communication protocols to send identical warnings." He projected the messages. "Return the children. They're coming. All of them." "These are our most disciplined operatives," Xarvok continued. "Individuals who have maintained cover for decades, who have survived the most sophisticated counterintelligence measures. Yet every one of them risked exposure to send this warning." Tactical Officer Mevran, who had remained silent throughout the proceedings, stepped forward. "Commander, we're detecting unusual energy signatures throughout our perimeter defense grid. The patterns don't match known weapon systems." Kileth, who had been granted observer status for the deliberation, spoke softly. Those aren't weapons charging. Every human-owned vessel, military, civilian, even centuries-old heritage ships normally kept as museums, is moving toward your space. They're adjusting their drive signatures to minimize detection. The ancient Veldari moved to the central display, overlaying the human neural scans with Sarian historical records. Your ancestors encountered a phenomenon similar to human protective rage. The records of your encounters with the Krell described warriors who continued fighting despite mortal injuries, who displayed strength beyond physiological limits. The Krell were myth, Vexcor insisted. They were real. The Supreme Strategist contradicted, surprising the Council. I have seen the sealed records. Our ancestors did not worship them as gods out of primitive superstition, but from witnessed evidence of capabilities that defied explanation. As the debate intensified, Sarvok received a private alert on his neural interface. He discreetly activated it, finding a message from his resident security system. The feed showed his daughter, Celeris, accessing his personal archives, specifically the human records Dr. Chen had provided. The 12-cycle-old watched with tears forming in her eyes, an expression of emotion that would typically bring shame to a Tsarian family. As the footage of human parents rescuing children played, she looked directly at the security sensor, as if knowing her father would see the recording. "Father," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "are we the monsters in this story?" Zarvok closed the feed, a coldness settling in his chest. The question struck with more force than any tactical assessment. Throughout his military career, strategic necessity had always provided moral clarity. Yet his daughter's simple question cut through centuries of Sarian military tradition. The Supreme Strategist called for a final vote. The council members registered their positions through neural interfaces, their decisions materializing on the central display. By a margin of 1 vote, with Grand Marshal Vexcor's faction narrowly prevailing, the Tsarian Empire chose to maintain their position. The human children would remain as leverage. As the council dispersed, Sarvok lingered in the chamber, reviewing the tactical projections once more. The analysis predicted a 78% probability of Sarian victory in conventional conflict with human forces. But the images of his daughter's tears, set against Dr. Chen's calm morning, suggested there was nothing conventional about what was coming. 6 hours before Dr. Chen's deadline expired, Planetary Security Officer Dravik burst into Sarvok's private quarters, breaking all protocols of rank and procedure. "Commander, our communications network has been compromised," he reported, mandibles twitching with barely controlled agitation. "Civilian channels across 12 worlds are receiving unauthorized transmissions." Sarvok accessed the emergency feed. What he saw wasn't the sophisticated cyber warfare attack he expected, but something far more insidious, simple, emotionally resonant messages broadcasting directly to ordinary Tsarian citizens. Videos showing the human children in captivity, historical footage of human rescue operations, personal messages from families of the abducted. How did they penetrate our quantum encryption? Sarvok demanded. "They didn't," Dravik replied. "The transmissions are coming from communication nodes physically placed within our systems. Thousands of them, activated simultaneously." Kileth, summoned to assess the situation, studied the transmission patterns with a resigned expression. "For decades, human merchant vessels have been visiting your worlds, establishing trade relationships, cultural exchanges. They weren't gathering military intelligence. They were building connections with your civilian population." "To what purpose?" Sarvok asked. "Understanding," the Veldari answered. "While your military studied human weaknesses, they studied your values. They identified aspects of Sarian culture that would respond to their situation. Your cultural emphasis on honorable combat, your literary traditions of protecting the innocent. The strategy was working. Reports flooded in of public gatherings on multiple worlds. The Sarian population, raised on ancient warrior codes that valued honor in battle above all else, was openly questioning the tactic of taking children as hostages. In the operations center, tactical alerts suddenly blared. "Commander, we're detecting anomalous radiation signatures within our defensive perimeter," reported Officer Mevrin. "Possible cloaked vessels, but the signatures don't match known stealth configurations." Analysis revealed the brilliant adaptation. The humans had modified primitive water-based submarine technology for space warfare, operating their ships at near-freezing temperatures with minimal energy emissions. They had bypassed the sophisticated detection grid by employing a method so technologically regressive that no Tsarian stratagem had accounted for it. "How many vessels?" Xarvok asked. Mevran's voice faltered. "We can't determine exact numbers. The signatures are dispersed throughout the system, concentrated near communication hubs and civilian centers." A junior science officer interrupted with new findings. "Sir, we've isolated a fragment of anomalous code in our primary defense grid. It appears to have been dormant for years, integrated so seamlessly with our systems that routine diagnostics never detected it." Xarvok recognized the implications immediately. The humans didn't just place communication nodes. They'd been preparing our systems for compromise all along. As if responding to his realization, alarms throughout the Tsarian capital suddenly fell silent. The primary defense grid displayed normal functioning, but peripheral systems reported conflicting data. The discrepancy could only mean one thing: their defenses were compromised, displaying false information while actual capabilities were degraded. "It's not external cyber warfare," Khalith observed quietly. "Your own people are disabling the systems from within." Security footage confirmed this assessment. Across the Tsarian homeworld, civilians and military personnel alike were systematically disabling defense systems, not through violence, but through coordinated, peaceful non-compliance. Grand Marshal Vexcor stormed into the command center, rage evident in his flared neck crest. "This is treason. Execute Emergency Protocol Dominance Prime immediately." The protocol would authorize lethal force against civilian protesters. Before Xarvok could intervene, a senior communications officer removed her headset and stood. "I will not transmit that order," she announced, her voice unwavering despite the cultural taboo against defying military authority. One by one, other officers followed suit, removing insignia or simply stepping away from stations. "What is happening?" Vexcor demanded, incredulous at the unprecedented breakdown in Tsarian military discipline. Khalith's answer came with surprising gentleness. "They're choosing sides in a story that suddenly has moral clarity. Your people have been watching human historical records for hours now. They've seen parents sacrificing everything to save children who aren't even their own. It resonates with something fundamental in Tsarian cultural memory, the ancient concept of Karithfal, honor that transcends duty." On the main view screen, a transmission interrupted all channels. Dr. Chen's face appeared, but she spoke not to the Tsarian leadership, but directly to their people. "We are coming for our children," she said simply. "Help us avoid unnecessary bloodshed." The 48-hour deadline expired with the Tsarian leadership still deadlocked. Grand Marshal Vexcor had ordered the children transferred to the supposedly impregnable fortress on Sar Prime, believing centralization would strengthen their position. It was the first attack that revealed how profoundly they had misunderstood what was coming. "Multiple contacts emerging from hyperspace," announced the perimeter defense officer, her voice rising with alarm. "Tactical configuration unknown." The command center's main display revealed not the coordinated fleet formation Tsarian doctrine anticipated, but thousands of small, fast vessels appearing simultaneously across a vast front. Each ship moved independently, following no discernible pattern, making defensive targeting algorithms essentially useless. "What is this?" Vexcor demanded. "Where is their command structure?" Analysis revealed the shocking truth. These weren't coordinated military strikes, but individual vessels crewed by families, parents, and volunteers. Each determined their own attack vectors with a single-minded purpose that made their movements impossible to predict. Their tactics make no strategic sense, complained the tactical officer. They're sacrificing optimal positioning for speed and unpredictability. Killeth, who had remained in the command center as an observer, spoke softly. You're applying military logic to a non-military force. Your warriors fight for glory and empire. These humans would fly directly into a sun if they believed it gave a single child one more chance to survive. A Tsarian science vessel monitoring the engagement transmitted new data before being disabled. The human vessels were employing radiation shielding technologies normally restricted to medical isolation units, adapted to protect against Tsarian energy weapons. The adaptation wasn't perfect. Many human ships suffered critical damage, but it allowed them to advance much closer to Tsarian defenses than should have been possible. They're studying our defensive responses in real time. Sarvok realized. Each wave adjusts based on what happened to the previous. A perimeter breach alarm sounded as several smaller craft broke through, accelerating toward the planetary surface. Automated defense systems intercepted most, but 3 evaded detection long enough to deploy landing craft. Security feeds showed the human boarding parties, not military special forces as expected, but civilians wearing hastily adapted environmental suits. Their weapons were mismatched, their tactics unorthodox, but they moved with terrible purpose. Intruders have breached detention level 3, reported security. They've accessed the transport manifest and are heading for embarkation bay 7. Kazarvok studied the security feed with growing unease. The human rescue team comprised individuals of varying ages and physical capabilities, including a gray-haired female who moved with obvious joint pain but operated communications equipment with remarkable efficiency. They're a volunteer rescue team, Killeth observed. Parents, former military specialists, engineers, medical professionals, individuals who trained specifically for this operation. The impromptu team succeeded in securing 16 children before Tsarian elite guards cornered them. What happened next shook even the most seasoned Tsarian warriors. The humans formed a protective circle around the children, absorbing multiple energy weapon impacts rather than surrender. Their environmental suits, modified with reactive medical gel, allowed them to continue fighting despite injuries that should have been incapacitating. How are they still functioning? VexCorps demanded, watching the feed with horrified fascination. The answer came when the security cameras captured a close-up of one human's face. Pupils dilated, expression focused beyond pain or fear. The neural scan pattern Killeth had shown them manifested in living form. The rescue team eventually secured an escape vessel, sacrificing 3 of their members in covering actions that ensured the children's evacuation. The humans left behind died continuing to fight, buying seconds of time with their lives. In the stunned silence that followed, a priority communication alert sounded from the fortress on Sar Prime. The remaining children were being moved to hyperspace-capable transports under VexCorps' direct orders. He's escalating, Sarvok realized, using the children as shields during transport. The tactical display updated with new information. The human vessels weren't retreating after the partial rescue. They were regrouping, adapting their approach based on what they'd learned about Tsarian defenses. Sarvok accessed his neural interface, replaying the image of the human rescue team forming a living barrier around the children. In that moment, his decision crystallized. The footage of his daughter's tears, the broken Tsarian honor codes, the humans' inexplicable determination, all converged into certainty. He opened a direct encrypted channel to Dr. Chen's vessel. "I want to help you recover your children," he transmitted. "All of them. Treason during active conflict carries an immediate death sentence." VexCorps' voice echoed through the secure channel. "You understand this, Commander." Kazarvok stood in the communications hub of the Tsarian Central Command, surrounded by officers whose loyalties now hung in precarious balance. His decision to contact Dr. Chen had not gone undetected. "I understand honor, Marshal," Sarvok replied. "Something our actions have abandoned." The neural interfaces of every officer in the room flashed with VexCorps' override command. "Detain Commander Sarvok immediately. Half the officers moved to comply, while the others hesitated, their scales shifting to the azure hue of moral uncertainty. "The children are being moved to transports," Sarvok announced to the room. "Not for their safety, but to use them as living shields during escape. Is this the glory of the Tsarian Empire?" Those words fractured the room's allegiances completely. Junior officers disabled the neural command relays, blocking further orders from high command. Security personnel sealed the entrances, creating a temporary sanctuary within the communications hub. "We have minutes before they breach these doors," warned Tactical Officer Mevran, who had chosen Sarvok's side. "What's your plan, Commander?" "We need to reach the children before they're dispersed across multiple vessels," Sarvok replied, accessing the central database. "And we need to broadcast the truth to all Tsarian worlds." A proximity alert sounded, not from Tsarian forces attempting to breach the hub, but from an unauthorized vessel somehow bypassing the perimeter defenses entirely. The craft employed a polymer-based hull configuration that absorbed standard detection scans, using the Tsarian's own communication relays as navigation beacons. Dr. Chen emerged from the vessel, accompanied by a small team of humans whose equipment seemed cobbled together from mismatched technologies. None wore standard military insignia, yet they moved with practiced coordination. "Your message was received, Commander," Chen said, lowering her weapon in a gesture of cautious trust. "Your daughter helped us locate this facility." "Celeris." Sarvok's mandibles clicked in surprise. "How?" "She accessed your private communications and contacted us through the nodes we placed in civilian networks. She's been rallying young Tsarians through underground channels." Chen studied his reaction. "She said her father taught her that honor matters more than orders." The revelation struck Sarvok with unexpected force. His daughter, applying his own principles to judge his actions, had found him wanting and acted to correct the imbalance. "Vexcor has moved the remaining children to dispersal transports at the Tsar Prime Fortress," Sarvok explained, transferring the tactical data to Chen's team. "His elite guard remains loyal." An explosion shook the chamber as Tsarian security forces began breaching the outer doors. Time was running short. "We need to reach the central broadcast node," Sarvok continued. "From there, we can transmit to all Tsarian worlds simultaneously." Chen nodded to her team. "Half of us will secure the node. The rest will accompany you to the fortress." She turned to Sarvok, her expression resolute. "Your people need to see who's truly protecting their honor." The joint force, humans and Tsarian defectors, split into their assigned teams. As they prepared to move out, Chen approached Sarvok directly, removing her sidearm and extending it grip-first toward him. "A gesture of trust," she explained. "Where I'm from, handing someone your weapon means you're placing your life in their hands." Sarvok accepted the weapon with profound solemnity. In Tsarian culture, such a gesture would be unthinkable. Weapons were extensions of a warrior's soul, never willingly surrendered. As they moved through the corridors toward the central broadcast node, they encountered pockets of resistance. The humans displayed combat techniques unlike anything Sarvok had witnessed. Not superior technology, but an inexplicable willingness to endure damage to protect others, including their Tsarian allies. They reached the broadcast center just as Vexcor's elite forces converged on their position. In the ensuing firefight, 2 humans were severely injured shielding Tsarian defectors from energy blasts. Despite their injuries, they continued providing covering fire until the team secured the chamber. "We have 4 minutes before security overrides activate," Mevran reported, working feverishly at the communications array. Sarvok accessed the fortress security feed, capturing real-time footage of the children being loaded onto separate vessels. He then linked to his daughter's underground communication network, which had spread far wider than he had imagined. The broadcast began, transmitting to all Tsarian worlds. Unedited footage of the raid, the children's captivity, and Vexcor's orders to use them as shields. The transmission concluded with something unexpected. Sarvok's daughter, Celeris, standing before a gathering of young Sarians. Which ancestors would be proud of stealing children? She asked, her voice clear and unwavering. Not mine. Not yours. This is not our path to glory. Throughout Sarian space, military vessels began standing down. Civilian protests transformed into organized resistance against Vexacor's remaining loyal forces. The cultural tipping point had been reached. Keyleth arrived as the broadcast concluded, having negotiated safe passage through the conflict zone. It appears, he observed with quiet satisfaction, that I may soon be needed as a mediator rather than a harbinger of doom. 6 lunar cycles later, the newly appointed Sarian diplomatic chamber bore little resemblance to the austere war council it had replaced. Gone were the oppressive obsidian walls and militaristic insignia, replaced by open architecture that incorporated design elements from multiple worlds, including Earth. Commander Xarvok, now First Mediator Xarvok, stood before the gathered representatives, his formal armor exchanged for the indigo robes of civil leadership. The transition had not been without bloodshed. Vexacor's loyalists had fought to the end, believing surrender more dishonorable than defeat. But the cultural revolution sparked by Celeris and her network had spread too rapidly to contain. The chamber's entrance dilated as the Earth delegation arrived. Dr. Eleanor Chen, now appointed as humanity's formal ambassador, led the procession. Behind her walked 22 human families, parents and children reunited after the conflict. The remaining 16 families had chosen to participate remotely, still recovering from their ordeal. Welcome to Tsar Prime. Xarvok greeted them, performing the newly established gesture of peaceful intent, arms crossed at the wrists, palms open. Chen returned the gesture with perfect precision. We come in friendship, First Mediator. The formal proceedings began with the dedication of a memorial wall spanning the chamber's eastern face. Unlike traditional Sarian monuments that glorified military victories, this wall displayed names of both humans and Sarians who had died during the conflict. Beneath each name, a single phrase in both languages. Honor transcends borders. Today we formalize what began in crisis, Xarvok announced to the assembly. Not merely peace between our peoples, but understanding. Chen stepped forward, activating a holographic display. Earth brings an unconventional proposal, she explained. An exchange program for our youngest generations. The proposal outlined specialized educational opportunities, human children studying Sarian strategic history and philosophical traditions, young Sarians immersing themselves in human creative expression and adaptability training. Our differences nearly brought destruction, Chen continued. By ensuring our children know each other, we create the strongest foundation for lasting peace. A murmur of approval spread through the chamber. Among the Sarian delegation, several young faces showed particular enthusiasm. Graduates of Celeris's underground network, now serving as junior diplomatic attaches. From his observer's position, Ambassador Keyleth watched with quiet satisfaction. After centuries of diplomatic service, witnessing species either destroy each other or retreat into isolated coexistence, this outcome represented something he had rarely observed: genuine evolution of understanding. As the formal ceremony concluded, Xarvok approached Chen privately. There's something I've wondered since we first met, he admitted. When you came alone to our war council, unarmed and seemingly vulnerable, was that tactical? Chen's expression softened, not entirely. I believe that seeing one parent, just one, might help you understand what was coming better than any fleet demonstration. It worked, Xarvok acknowledged. At least for some of us. Their conversation was interrupted by unexpected laughter from across the chamber. Celeris stood with a human child, a boy of approximately her age who had been among the captives. Despite having no translator, they were communicating through an improvised game involving mathematical patterns tapped on a shared display surface. Elian, Chen identified, her voice warming. My son. He's been studying Sarian mathematical sequences since we returned home. Xarvok watched their interaction with newfound perspective. They have no shared language, yet they find common ground. Children often do, Chen replied. It's adults who forget how. The gathering transitioned to less formal interactions, with families from both species cautiously beginning conversations through translators. Cultural attaches circulated, explaining unfamiliar customs and preventing misunderstandings. Khalith eventually made his way to where Sarvok and Chen stood observing the proceedings. I must return to the Veldari Confederation, he announced. My report on these events is long overdue. And what will you tell them? Sarvok asked. The ancient diplomat's multifaceted eyes reflected the chamber's lights. That I was witness to something unprecedented. Two species who found their best selves through crisis, rather than their worst. As Khalith departed, he accessed the Confederation's sinological database, updating 2 entries. For the Sarians, capable of profound honor when properly inspired. For humans, their capacity for violence is matched only by their capacity for forgiveness, the difference determined by one question: are their children safe? The formal alliance signed that day would eventually expand into one of the galaxy's most productive cultural and technological exchanges. Decades later, when asked to identify the turning point in the relationship, neither humans nor Tsarians cited the conflict itself, but rather what followed. A simple game between 2 children who saw equations where others saw only differences.